a Bible study on Genesis chapter 1, in verses 6 through 8. Can I tell you about a season I am almost embarrassed to admit? There was a period in my life where I could not say no to anything, not to requests, not to people, not to commitments that kept piling up like laundry I kept telling myself I would get to. I said yes to everything because somewhere in me, I believed that saying no meant I did not love people enough. That limits were the same thing as rejection. That if I just stayed available, stayed open, stayed poured out, that was what faithfulness looked like. And what I did not realize, what took me years to understand, was that I was not overflowing with love. I was flooding. I was water with no banks. I was spreading in every direction. And the further I spread, the thinner I got. The thinner I got, the less I had. The less I had, the more I reached and strained and pushed. And the more I resented the very people I was trying to serve. I was everywhere and I was nowhere. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you have lived that season. Maybe you are in it right now. Spread so thin, you have lost the shape of yourself, saying yes to so much that your yes does not mean anything anymore. Giving so freely that you have nothing left to give. Moving in every direction because nobody, including you, ever drew a line and said, this far and no further. I need you to hold that because we are about to read 3 verses today, just 3. And in those 3 verses, God is going to do something that looks so simple, it is easy to miss. He is going to draw a line. He is going to put something between what was above and what was below. He is going to separate what would otherwise run together and swallow everything. And I am going to show you that what God did in the sky on the second day of creation is the same thing he wants to do in your life. We are in Genesis chapter 1. We are not rushing. We are staying at the table. We are savoring this because every word in this passage was placed here with purpose, and the meal is not over yet. Let us open it together. Here's what Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 says. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day, 3 verses. That is it. And I know it does not sound as dramatic as Let There Be Light. It does not have the thunder of the creation story's opening act. It sounds almost administrative, like God was just doing some organizational work, sorting things into buckets. But do not let the quietness of this act fool you, because what God does in these 3 verses reaches down into one of the deepest questions every human being eventually has to face. What holds things together? What keeps the chaos from consuming everything? And is there a God who is willing to step into the middle of the flood and draw a line? We have to slow down. We have to go deeper. We have to let this breathe. Because what is happening here is not just cosmology. It is not just ancient poetry about the sky. It is a revelation of the character of God. Now, before we break down the passage, we need to understand what was happening before God spoke in verse 6, because context is everything. In verse 2, we established that the earth was tohu vavohu, formless, void, dark, chaotic, the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Waters, plural, everywhere. Picture it. Not a river, not a lake, not even an ocean as we understand it. Just water. Boundless, directionless, shapeless water. Above and below and in every direction. No sky, no ground, no horizon. No distinction between where one thing ended and another began. And when there are no distinctions. When everything bleeds into everything else, with no lines between them, what you have is not fullness. What you have is chaos. Think about a painting, not the kind framed on a gallery wall. Think about a canvas where every color has run into every other color. The red is bleeding into the blue. The yellow is dissolving into the green. Every beautiful individual color is disappearing into one muddy, undifferentiated mess. Because colors that have no boundaries between them do not create a masterpiece. They create brown, a dull, undefined, unrecognizable brown that was once something vibrant and distinct. That is what the formless deep looked like before God spoke. And here is the spiritual truth I need you to hold right from the start. Without separation, without distinction, without the line that says this here and not there, nothing can be beautiful, nothing can be purposeful, nothing can be named, nothing can be seen for what it truly is. God already knew that. He had always known it. So he spoke. The Hebrew word at the center of these three verses is Raqia. It sounds like this: Raqia, Raqia. Most of your Bibles translate it as vault or expanse or firmament. And all of those translations are reaching for the same image, but the original word is richer than any one of them captures alone. Raqia comes from a root word that means to beat out thin, to spread out, to hammer flat. Think about a metalworker, a blacksmith. She takes a piece of raw metal, shapeless, heavy, dense, formless in its own way, and she puts it on the anvil, and she begins to hammer. And with each strike, the metal spreads. It thins. It takes shape. It becomes something that can hold form and function and structure. Something that was once a dense, unworkable lump becomes a surface, stretched, ordered, given dimension and definition by the work of intentional hands. That is what God did with the sky. He did not just point at empty space and name it sky. He hammered something out. He stretched something open. He created a surface between two massive bodies of water that would have, without it, collapsed back into each other and return everything to the formless deep. The sky is not decoration. The sky is not scenery. The sky is the boundary that makes everything below it possible. Every breath of air you have ever taken exists because God stretched out the Raqia. Every bird that has ever lifted off the ground did so in the space God made. Every sunrise you have ever watched paint itself across the horizon, painted itself on the canvas that God hammered into place on the second day. The beauty of the morning sky is not incidental. It is structural. It is there because God drew a line. That line is not a limit on creation's potential. That line is what releases creation's potential. And I need you to hear that again, slowly. A boundary is not what shrinks the beautiful thing. A boundary is what makes the beautiful thing possible. Now, I want to sit with the other Hebrew word at the heart of this passage, because it is doing just as much work as Raqia. The word is Badal. 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 It means to separate, to divide, to make a distinction between, to distinguish one thing from another. And here is what I find remarkable. God uses this word 3 times in the story of creation, 3 separate acts of Badal, 3 moments where God steps into what is running together and says, no, this is different from that. These two things are not the same. Let me draw the line. And every single time God Badals something, something new becomes possible. On day 1, he battles the light from the darkness, and suddenly there is day and there is night. Not just one undifferentiated gray blur, but 2 distinct, named, purposeful realities. Day for one thing, night for another. Each one doing what it was made to do. Each one possible only because God drew the line. On day 2, he bedals the water above from the water below. And suddenly there is sky, there is depth, there is atmosphere, there is the very space in which all life will eventually breathe. And later, he will bedal again. He will keep drawing lines, keep making distinctions, keep separating what was running together so that each thing can be fully itself. Badal is not rejection. Badal is definition. Think about it this way. When a sculptor begins to work, she does not add material to the stone. She removes it. She takes away what does not belong so that the form that was always inside can be revealed. Every chisel strike is a separation. Every piece that falls away is a distinction being made. And when people stand before the finished work and catch their breath at the beauty of it, that beauty is entirely the product of what was separated, divided, taken away. That is Badal. God is a sculptor, and the chisel he uses is his word. When he says, let there be a vault, let there be a separation, let there be something between, he is not diminishing the creation. He is revealing it. He is chiseling away the chaotic blur so that each part of his creation can step fully into its own identity, its own purpose, its own name. And what he does to water and sky on day 2, he does to human lives. He bedals you from what you are drowning in. He draws a line between the flood and where you stand. He put something between you and what was consuming you. And that separation, that distinction, that is not punishment. That is the reveal. That is the chisel bringing out the shape that was always there. I want to stay here for a moment because I think a lot of us have been taught to be suspicious of limitations, especially those of us who grew up watching people we loved be told no by systems that should have said yes, who watched doors close that should have been open, who felt the word limit used against us as a weapon. I understand why the word boundary can feel cold, why it can feel like rejection dressed up in spiritual language. But what Genesis 1 is teaching us is something entirely different. It is showing us that the God who creates is also the God who contains. And that containment is not cruelty, it is craft. Here's the image I keep coming back to. Think about a riverbed. A river without banks is not freedom. A river without banks is a swamp. It is water going nowhere. It is water spreading so thin and so wide that it loses its current, its depth, its power, its direction. It becomes stagnant. It becomes breeding ground for things that should not grow there. It loses the very thing that made it a river. But give that same water 2 banks and something changes. The water finds its course. It deepens. It moves. It carves through rock over time. It sustains life along every mile of its path. It becomes something people travel to just to stand beside, something people navigate by, something that has a name and a direction and a destination. The banks did not restrict what the river could be. The banks are the reason the river is a river at all. And when you feel God drawing a line in your life, when you feel Him saying this and not that, here and not there, yes to this and no to that, I need you to hear what He is really saying. He is not building a cage. He is giving you a riverbed. He is creating the conditions in which your life can move, in which your purpose can have direction, in which your gifts can run deep instead of spreading thin, in which you can become what He always saw when He looked at you. He is hammering out the Raqia. He is doing the work of Badal. He is drawing the line that makes everything on the other side of it possible. The boundary is not the end of the story. The boundary is what allows the story to begin. Now, I want to tell you about a conversation that changed me. I was sitting with a mentor, a woman who had pastored longer than I had been alive, and I was unloading everything, all the commitments, all the places I was showing up, all the ways I was saying yes. And I expected her to be proud of me. I expected her to say, that is beautiful. That is sacrifice. That is what it looks like to give your life away for others. Instead, she looked at me for a long moment and she said, baby, water without a shore is a flood, and a flood does not feed anybody. It just drowns them. I sat with that for a long time because I had confused availability with abundance. I had confused having no edges with being generous. I had confused spreading thin with pouring out. But a cup with no bottom does not pour. It just leaks. Everything pours in and everything runs right back out, and nothing accumulates and nothing can be held and nothing can be carried to the person who is thirsty. God does not want you to be an endless leak. He wants you to be a vessel. And a vessel requires shape. A vessel requires walls. A vessel requires the Raqia, the hammered surface, the stretched and ordered boundary that says this is what I hold and this is what I am. When God told me no to certain things in certain seasons, when He allowed doors to close that I was pushing against with everything I had, I called it disappointment for a long time. I called it doors closing. I called it being overlooked. I called it not understanding what God was doing. But looking back now, I see the riverbed. I see the chisel marks. I see the shape that was being revealed. I see the Raqia. And what I called restriction was actually God saying, this is exactly who you are. And everything that is not this, everything I am separating you from is not your loss. It is your definition. Now, here is what I cannot skip, because this passage does not stay in the Old Testament. The same God who stretched out the Raqia in Genesis 1 shows up again in the middle of a storm on the Sea of Galilee. You know the story. Jesus is in a boat with His disciples. A storm comes, not a gentle rain, a violent squall, waves crashing into the boat, water from above and water from below, just like the formless deep of Genesis 1. Chaos in every direction. The disciples are terrified. They wake Jesus, and Jesus gets up, and He speaks to the wind and the waves, and He says, peace, be still. And the wind died, and there was a great calm. What He is doing in that boat is the same thing He did in the beginning. He is drawing the line between the chaos and the safe place. He is doing the work of Badal. He is stretching out the Raqia between what was overwhelming and where His people stand. The disciples looked at each other and said, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And the answer that Genesis 1 gives us is this is the one who has always spoken to the chaos. This is the one who was there before the beginning, through whom all things were made. This is the Word who spoke the sky into existence and separated the waters on the second day. This is the one who has been drawing lines between the flood and your life since before your life existed. Jesus did not just calm that one storm on that one lake. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, which means the voice that said, "Peace, be still to the Sea of Galilee," is the same voice that is hovering over the particular storm in your life right now. The same one who drew the line in Genesis 1 can draw the line between you and what is trying to swallow you. He is still doing the work of Badal. He is still stretching out the Raqia. He is still speaking the word that puts something between the flood and your next breath. And here is something the Apostle Paul wrote that I want you to hear. In his letter to the church at Colossae, chapter 1, verse 17, he writes this about Jesus. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. In him all things hold together. Do you hear what Paul is reaching back to? He is describing what Jesus does with the same language Genesis 1 uses to describe what the Raqia does. He is saying the vault in the sky that holds creation together, the hammered expanse that separated water from water and made life possible. That was Jesus. He is the one in whom all things hold together. He is the boundary between the chaos and the beauty. He is the Raqia. He is the word that God spoke to keep everything from collapsing back into the formless deep. And if he is holding the cosmos together, he can hold your life together too. Whatever feels like it is running into everything else. Whatever feels like it has no shape, no banks, no boundary, no line between what is flooding in and where you are supposed to stand. Bring it to the one in whom all things hold together. He is not unfamiliar with that work. It is the first thing he ever did. Let us look at one more thing in these 3 verses before we step back and take in the whole picture. Verse 8 says, God called the vault sky. He named it. Now, why does that matter? Because in the ancient world, and in the Hebrew scriptures particularly, to name something was to establish its identity, its purpose, its place in the order of things. When God names something, he is not just labeling it for convenience. He is declaring what it is. He is speaking its nature into its existence. He is giving it an identity that corresponds to what he made it to be. The vault is not just hanging there anonymously in the atmosphere. God looked at it and said, "You are sky. You are the expanse. You are the boundary that makes everything below you possible. You are what holds the deep from coming back down. You are what gives the birds their domain, and the clouds their home, and the sunlight its pathway. You are sky." And now it knows what it is. Now, here is where this lands in your life today. There are things God has separated you from, set apart in you, drawn a line around in you that he has also named. He did not just create you and leave you hoveless. He named you. He looked at the particular combination of gifts and wounds and experiences and resilience and tenderness that makes you who you are. And he said, I know what this is. I know what this one is made for. I know the name of this. And that name is not what the world has been calling you. It is not what the hard season made you feel like. It is not the name that got written on you by somebody who did not understand what they were looking at. It is the name that God spoke before any of that existed. You were named before you were confused. You were named before you were lost. You were named before the flood came. And the name God gave you is the truest thing about you. Badal separated you for it. Raqia created the space around it. And God's voice sealed it. That name is yours. It has always been yours. Here is the big picture of what we walked through today. In verses 6 through 8, the pattern we saw in day 1 continues, but it goes deeper. God speaks. Something new is created. The chaos is not fought, not argued with, not overpowered in a battle. It is simply ordered, separated, named. A new distinction exists that did not exist before. And because that distinction exists, life becomes possible. The sky is between the waters above and the waters below. And that in between, that Raqia, that stretched and hammered expanse of ordered space, is where everything breathes. God is still doing this. He is still speaking into the chaos of human lives. He is still doing the work of Badal, of separating what was running together. He is still stretching out the Raqia, still drawing the line between the flood and the safe place, still naming what he has made. I have felt it in my own life. I have been in seasons where everything was running together, where I could not tell work from rest, giving from depletion, love from codependency, calling from compulsion. It all blurred, it all flooded, and I did not know where I ended and everything else began. And then slowly, through prayer, through word, through the slow work of the Spirit, God started doing the work of Badal. He started separating things out, drawing lines, making distinctions, hammering out the Raqia between the flood and where I was supposed to stand. And what looked like loss, what looked like doors closing, relationships shifting, callings narrowing, was actually the chisel, the sculptor at work, the shapes being revealed. He took my flood and gave me a river. Same God, same word, same patient, intentional love. We have now walked through 8 verses of Genesis chapter 1. 8 verses. And already we have seen a God who existed before time, who created everything from nothing, whose spirit hovers over the darkest and most formless places with warmth and intention, whose word alone shatters the dark and brings the light, who draws the lines that make beauty possible, who separates the chaos so that each distinct thing can step into its identity and its name. This is not a distant, abstract, theological God. This is a God who is hovering over your formless places, who is drawing lines in your flood, who is stretching out the Raqia between what would consume you and where you are called to stand, who has named you with a name that was always true and threaded through every word of it. Jesus, the Word made flesh, the one in whom all things hold together, the one who spoke peace to the storm and is still speaking it now. So I want to leave you with a question, not a task, just something to sit with. Where in your life right now have you been calling a boundary a punishment? Where have you looked at a limit God has drawn and seen rejection instead of protection? Where have you resisted the Raqia, the line between the flood and your safe place? Because it felt like loss instead of definition. Because the God of Genesis 1 is still doing the work of day 2 in human lives. He is still hammering out the expanse, still drawing the line, still doing the work of Badal. And what he is separating you from is not your blessing. It is what was keeping you from it. Trust the Raqia. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 104, verses 2 and 3. He wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his upper chambers on the waters. That is the Raqia. That is day 2. That is a God who takes the flood and makes it a foundation, who takes the chaos and makes it a ceiling, who turns what could have swallowed everything into the very canopy under which all life thrives. Before you go, I want to leave you with one question to carry with you today. What in your life has no banks right now? And are you willing to let God draw the line? Sit with that. Let it stay with you through your day. Let it settle into the honest places. And when you are ready, drop your answer in the comments below. You do not have to have it figured out. You just have to be honest. This is a safe place. We are in this together. If this word touched something in you today, share it with somebody who is flooding. You never know who is spread so thin right now that they have forgotten what it feels like to move in one direction with depth and purpose. Maybe this is the word they need to hear. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on your notifications because we are just getting started. Day 3 is coming. And trust me, when you see what God does with dry ground and seed and the word spoken over things that have not yet grown, you will not want to miss it. I will see you there.